Hello, Georgetta Gankars here, and I wanted to do a video today, and it's a little bit different than my painting videos. I wanted to do a video about the methods of learning, and it's something that I just see the way students have learned in general, not only in my classroom, and I just wanted the feedback of students and maybe other instructors if they want to share their input of different types of methods of learning that they learn to reach students that in the classroom that might be a little bit struggling. So the thing is, it's helpful as a student if you comment, right, on the things that you might say, I feel that way too, or this would help me better. And it's just kind of like a little dialogue between, students, maybe teachers, and what's happening in the classroom so we can better serve you. So I learn in my classroom, at least the methods of learning are three things. And what happens is when I explain something to a student, I call it the brain, paper, and pen kind of method. And what I mean by that is the students have to, when I lecture, when I'm talking, they have to listen to what I'm saying, and they have to kind of process it. And then next, they're going to finally create. Okay? So the thing is, not all students go through each of these stages very easily. So it's my goal and my job as an instructor to help them because they might get stuck in one stage. So, for an example, what do I mean? If I'm lecturing and I tell, I have the syllabus and I'm telling a student, okay, this is what they need to write this paper. It needs to be New Times Roman, 1 inch space or 2 inch space, whatever it is. I might get the paper back, a different type font, and different spacing. If I tell a student to do whatever the assignment would be, it would be different. So the problem would be there, the communication between the student and the teacher, right? So it would be the lecturing. So most time what instructors will do is they'll be like, okay, they'll just repeat what they said. And that doesn't always work because the student is not getting it. So if you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, it's not going to make the student understand. So you have to kind of understand where is the student not following you. And it's probably in the lecture process. So that means you would have to find a new way to make them understand that. And this is what I found from a lot of students. Sometimes when you're giving them something in written form, they can't comprehend the written form. Okay, so in that situation, I might have to change the curriculum like on the spot for them to make them understand in that sense. And I might have to give them a visual cue. So sometimes when I'm teaching art, if I'm writing something to them in an email, or if it's in the curriculum, I'll do a visual cue and I might have a cartoon drawing the action that they need to be doing. So whether if it's turning on the computer, whether if it's getting a reference file, I might draw a little figure, right? And it's standing, then it's sitting at the computer, then it's looking at the reference file, whatever it is that they need to be doing so they can follow that step by step. And then sometimes students don't get that, right? Because they can't look at something and put themselves in that position. Right? They cannot look at that cartoon and feel that it is them and follow that storyline. So then I need to find another way to adapt. And what I usually do is I just do the action. So that means putting the student directly in the moment. And that visual cue might be that instead of me drawing a cartoon, looking at a reference file, I might just have the reference file itself. So I might have a screenshot of the reference file. And then maybe the next step, is they need to, go to the computer. So I do a screenshot of the computer. Maybe the next step is they need to hold the paintbrush with their hand, right or left, and then I'll show them a screenshot of where they need to hold the paintbrush. So that part is a little bit easier. So again, sometimes the students cannot understand the lecturing, and then the visual cues are helpful. And those are two different examples of visual cues. One, where the student is looking and they can put themselves in that position of that other figure that I drew. And secondly, where they're just in the moment and they see exactly what they need to see as a pictorial representation instead of just kind of hearing my words and imagining what that is. Because sometimes when a student hears words, they make a different interpretation in their mind, right? So it's that connection that you have to understand. The next thing is creating, right? And that's the hardest part. So remember when I told you in the beginning of this, when I started this, it's the brain, right? The talking, the lecturing, and then going to the process, which might be, for me, in my case, if the students were painting, right? Or they might be writing. And then the last thing is the pen, which would be the creation. And that's the hardest part because that's where you have to do the demo. So you have to show the student like how to hold the paintbrush, because even though you might have, explained in detail in the email, they might not get that, right? You might have to show them which paintbrush to use. You might show them how to write a sentence explaining, whatever the subject is the student is trying to make, because sometimes they can't make that connection themselves. So they need examples of the sentence structure that you want them to do, right? You can't just say, okay, just describe this, because they might not understand what that means. They'll need a couple of examples of that in their subject matter, okay? Now, the thing is, sometimes students do need pictorial cues, because some students, when you speak, they might make their own picture in their own head that might not represent what you are telling them. The other thing is I work with students that also need pictorial cues because the writing is just too much for them. Sometimes they can't make that connection. So you can teach them how to be better writers sometimes with these pictorial cues. And even I find this in art, it works really well. And some students, they don't have the writing skills, or they don't have the comprehension skills that they need at that level. Sometimes it might be a language factor. Sometimes students might not be efficient enough in that language to understand. Sometimes I run into students like that, and then if they're, they might be bilingual, so they might understand the drawings in another language, or if I'm looking at an app to understand them a little bit better, I can do those drawings for them. But it's my job as an instructor to be able to reach them. So I want to explain something to you, because my idea of what I call going from brain to paper to pen, or talk process to create. The last one is the hardest again, the create part. And the thing with that is it's kind of like writer's block, or painter's block. When you're standing at the canvas, right, you don't know what to do, right? Or you listen to what the teacher said and it went to your brain, you were able to process it, but you can't put it out, right? So what I do in my painting class is I have to realize how the students' brains are working. And usually I do an exercise like mixing colors, because mixing colors will tell me where the student is in that process. If they're in the process of being stuck when I'm talking, if they're in the process of being stuck when I'm doing the process of telling them what to do, or if they're stuck in the process of creation. Again, if they're stuck in the process of brain, paper, or pen. And the way I do that is I have them mix these exercises, and I can see if they understand what I'm telling them as far as just me speaking to them, then they really don't have a problem with the lecturing of what I'm saying, right? And you might have one student that might, and that's a student that's the most important student in that sense, because every student you treat the same, but you want to reach all students and have them understand. So what I mean by important is making them understand what you want them to do, or what the assignment is, I should say. So the thing is, that process can be a little bit difficult. So what I do is when the mixing of colors, if I see that they're mixing and I'm telling them to mix blue and green and they're doing it, or whatever color it is, and I see that they're doing it, I can understand that they understand that process of me lecturing, right? If it's in a written format and they're doing it, I say, okay, they understand the written form. Some students don't have a problem with that, but then in the mixing colors, they don't understand the process. And remember, the process is the idea of what you're doing once you have that information. So this is the students that basically, when they're kind of going through the process, they understand what they're supposed to be doing, but they're like, what do I do next? That's when they need like a visual cue, or they need me to come and literally help them, you see? maybe show them, okay, this is exactly how you hold the paintbrush. This is where you hold the pen. This is the sentence that I'm trying to make you, or that I'm not trying to make you, but that I want you to understand in this kind of structure. And it's kind of going through the process like that. And when they're mixing the colors, I can see, okay, they understand it. They know what the next step is. But the student that is struggling on picking those colors, I understand the problem is now not understanding, but the process. So I have to, again, help them with that process. And the last thing that I learn by students with the mixing the colors is they might know, they might listen to the lecture, they might go and have the colors all together and they know how to mix them, but they don't know how to create. Okay, so they don't know how to go beyond that. And that's, again, where those visual cues will really help with me doing the action myself and then having them do that repetitive action, whether that's painting, whether that's, how they should hold a paintbrush, whether that's mixing a solvent, whether it's writing a certain sentence. And so those are the things as far as I learned as brain, pen, and paper and pen. And sometimes you just have to do, the action and put the student directly there in the moment. Now, the thing is, I find out that a lot of students, when we're painting in the classroom, we're just painting, we're not plein air, so we're not on location, which I also do. But if they're just painting from a photograph or a memory, sometimes that can be hard to bring up. And most students are just painting, right, from photographs, right? So, or they have a model or whatever that is. But I find out to get that process of the brain working where they're kind of stuck, because sometimes they have a visual cue, right, and they can't bring it out, or sometimes they're looking at words and they can't interpret what that means. And I find out there's two ways that I handle that. The first thing is I might have a student, when we mix colors, we mix on a palette. So that's like kind of like where we would mix all our colors with our palette knife when we're kind of about to paint. And I have students use a regular canvas instead. And they mix all the colors on the canvas, and then I have them take that canvas, and this is just from mixing colors. This is not a painting, right? I have them take that where they have all the colors, and then I have them interpret and bring something out of that. So looking at this could be a sky, I guess this could be a landscape. If I turned it upside down, this could be, I guess trees, and this could be water. So the point is the student has to look at something and they have to interpret it and they have to bring something out. So it gets them thinking of these visual cues, language skills, in the back without them actually knowing that they're learning and that they're doing that. The next thing that I might do in painting is I have a student like read a poem. It could be their favorite line or their favorite book. And what they have to do if they have to make a painting on that. Right? So they have to, say, say that their line was, the day was windy and the birds are circling the trees, right? They have to think about how they're taking in that language and making a visual cue of it. And sometimes that's where students get stuck. So for me, when I have students do exercises like that, it improves their visual of what they're thinking inside their mind and how they're going to interpret that. And then it gets them also to putting it on the canvas, or if they're writing, on the paper, because they have that visual cue going along with that. And again, some students just will work from the visual, and then some students, again, they can see something like a poem, right? And then they can interpret into the visual. So it gets them thinking in a different way. And I say this because not all students hear what you are saying, and they might interpret it differently. And the reason why I'm saying that is you can do this example right now, right? Say I just told you to go, and you can stop the video and go and get a bunch of colored crayons, crayons of different colors, or markers or paints, whatever. And you come back. You can do it on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter, a canvas, watercolor paper, scrap paper. If you didn't have colored pencils, you could use a pen, but it prefer if it was colorful, or colors. And I just told you to make a sun, right? And the sentence that I'm going to give you right now, right, that you're going to draw, right, this image in your head and put it on the paper. And again, this is a process of taking an image, listening to my voice, putting it in your head, and then processing it to the paper. Remember, we talked about sometimes that's what students might have get stuck on, and again, I mean, I call it the brain paper pen or the talking process create. That's just something that I've created and I call it that myself. But say the sentence was is the sun sat in the clouds, right? And I'm telling you that that's what you're going to draw. The sun sat in the clouds, okay? The reason why I'm telling you this example is, if everyone that is listening to this video is going to draw the sun sat in the clouds, everybody's going to draw it differently, okay? Some people, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say the red sun sat in the clouds, okay? So everyone is going to draw it differently. Some students might have, depending on what materials they have, it's going to look differently, obviously. So I'm not talking about the materials. I'm just talking about what they're thinking in their head and how they're going to put it on the paper. So some students might have the sun in the middle of the canvas and they have the clouds around it. Some students might have the sun at the top and they have the clouds on the side at the bottom of the canvas. Some students, even though I said the sun sat in the clouds, the sun could be in different areas on the paper. Some students might just forget all about the clouds, right, and just have the sun. Some students might have the sun on the side, on an edge, where they're just leaving the rest of the paper like it's negative space. The point is, that sentence is going to be different for each student. Some student might have colored the background of the sky blue and they had the sun sitting in the clouds, and they might have had the clouds as gray. And I didn't say that, right? Some students might just have just a red sun and just drew the clouds and left no color in the clouds. And some students might have a red sun and a blue sky and white clouds. The point is, it's going to be different, but it's the same sentence. And that's what happens with students when, even if you're telling them in detail, sometimes they might interpret it differently because some students are putting this pictorial picture in their brain of how it's supposed to be. So that's why it's important to be able to reach students and help them understand exactly what you're saying, and then have different types of learning aside in the curriculum for each student, because some students might learn visually, some students might learn by the written word, some students are able to interpret both of that information, and some students get stuck in the process, okay? So that's just like a little example about that sentence. Of course, that's not a good one as far as in detail, because students could be using watercolors, they could be using pen, they could be using pencil. Maybe they didn't even have a red something to draw with that's red, so they couldn't make the sun red. But the point is just the structure of how the sun would be sitting on the paper. Unless I described it in detail exactly what I wanted, students would not understand it. And sometimes even if you do describe it in detail, the way that the processing works for their brain is different. So you need to be able to learn what it is that they're stuck on. Are they stuck on the lecturing? Are they stuck on the process? Or are they stuck on creation? And the other thing is, and tweaking the curriculum to meet that. Sometimes even with the background, when you're on Zoom, they have these backgrounds that you can change. It can be too noisy for a student, so it's like too much for them to take in and process. So sometimes students will be able to listen to you if you're just, your face is there. I noticed that in large lecture halls, when I was a student years ago, sometimes it was a little bit harder when the professor was all the way in the bottom and there's like 500 students in the lecture hall. I always wondered why they didn't have these little television screens where you could see the professor up close. That'd probably be a little bit easier for students that couldn't take in all that information that's around them. So there's other things going on with the mind as far as processing where the student is when they're taking in the information. Are they in a place where they can really concentrate? Are they in a quiet place like a library, or is there a distraction going on? It could be there's a distraction in the classroom. Students I did this whole paper once where I had to study. I mean, I taught art therapy too, but I did this whole situation where I had to go to different classrooms and observe colors. And it's really interesting how certain colors that they use in classrooms and the way the desk is situated will actually totally change the learning environment. You know, sometimes if the classroom is a really bright color, it can really distract students. And it also has to go according to age levels. You'll notice that they usually, when they're doing that, I did hospital studies also of how they would have the walls in the hospital different colors and the reaction that it would make to the, you know, to the patients when they were sitting there, especially in the waiting room. And how they would feel with different colors and even the type of furniture. So it's interesting, just different things in your environment of how it can make students learn. And if you're teaching from home and they're on Zoom, you know, they're in their environment. So that could be also a situation. But the thing is, again, you know, sometimes again, students have problems with the lecturing, with the process, or the creation. And it's best to know which, you know, which of those processes or which of those stages that they're going through and how to reach them individually in each of those stages. And I'm saying this because I would like students to comment below if they've ever had a problem where they can say, oh yeah, that's an aha moment. Yes, I understood what the teacher was saying, but I couldn't process it. Or I understood what I wanted to do, but I couldn't get to the moment of creation. Or I understood the lecture and the process, and the creation, but I just couldn't process it. I needed a different way of putting that information in. And, you know, with online teaching and everything moving also online, even face to face, there's different ways that by reaching out to understand a little bit of how the student is thinking and processing, that we can be better instructors, right? And know how to work with each student to help them be able to understand the information that they need to do. So if you're a teacher and you want to comment, that's cool. And if you are a student and you had any of these moments where you had trouble, you know, where a teacher was lecturing, you didn't know what they were saying, you know, and if you knew of something that could help, that would help you through that process, you can comment below. That would be really helpful. You know, this is kind of not like a TED Talk, even though I'd like to do that. But the thing is, I'm just wondering what you feel, okay? And thanks for listening, and happy studies. Ciao.